That's not just a headline. It happened right here. A quiet street, a small shed, a boy who just wanted to play, and an HOA president who thought she was above the law. What started as petty rules turned into sirens, flashing lights, and a crime scene. By the time the deputies arrived, it was too late. The boy was crying, the neighbors were screaming, and the queen of the cul-de-sac was about to lose her crown. But here's the twist. You won't believe how it all ended. Welcome back to HOA Secrets. My name is Daniel. I live in a small suburban neighborhood in Ohio. I'm just a regular homeowner. But I've seen the kind of power games HOAs play. And today, I'm going to tell you a story that shook our entire street. So sit back, because this one is going to leave you speechless. I still remember that morning. The air felt heavy, but the sky was clear. Nothing about the street looked dangerous. Nothing looked wrong. But behind those perfect lawns and smiling houses, something dark was already set in motion. I was standing by my front porch, sipping cheap coffee from a cracked mug, watching the mail truck roll by. It was quiet, too quiet. And then I saw her. Marcia, the HOA president. She was standing in the middle of the cul-de-sac, clipboard in hand, sharp smile on her face, like she was planning something. You know that type of person who thinks they own the world. Even though it's just a few streets and picket fences, that was her. She wasn't just running the HOA. She was running everyone's lives, where we parked, how tall our grass could grow, even the color of our mailboxes. And if you dared to push back, she would find a way to make you regret it. That week, her target was the Wilson family. They lived 3 houses down. Good people, quiet people. Their son had a small shed in the backyard, painted bright colors. A little me, sigh, but full of joy, to that boy. It wasn't just a shed. It was a fort, a castle, his own little world. He would spend hours there, building toy cities, reading comic books, pretending he was a hero. But Marcia didn't see a child's dream. She saw a violation, an unauthorized structure, out of compliance with HOA bylaws. A threat to her precious order. The Wilsons begged her. They said it was just a shed for their son. But Marcia didn't care. She wanted it gone, and when she wanted something gone, it disappeared. That morning, she made the call. I didn't know it at first, but I felt something was off. 2 trucks rolled in. Not delivery trucks, not movers. Demolition. Big men with hammers and tools, walking straight toward the Wilsons' yard. I froze, my coffee shaking in my hand. The boy was out there. I could see him peeking through the shed's little window. His face lit up with that innocent smile only kids have. He didn't know what was about to happen. Marcia stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, sunglasses on, like she was a queen watching peasants obey her orders. The parents ran outside, shouting, begging the workers to stop. But the men didn't listen. They had papers in hand, signed by the HOA president herself, and then it happened. A loud crack, the sound of wood splitting. The shed shook. The boy's smile vanished. Neighbors rushed out of their houses, phones in their hands, recording, whispering. I felt my stomach drop, because I knew he was still inside. The workers didn't care. They kept pulling panels off, swinging their hammers. The parents screamed louder, the mother's voice breaking like glass. The father tried to push through, but one of the workers held him back, and Marcia, she just smirked. Like this was justice. Like this was power. I couldn't move. My feet felt nailed to the floor. All I could hear was the boy crying from inside that collapsing shed. All I could see was the horror on his parents' faces, and all I could feel was the sick truth of suburban life. Rules mattered more than people here. Paper mattered more than a child. Then came the sirens, loud, piercing, echoing through the neat little streets. A patrol car pulled up, then another. Lights flashing red and blue against white fences and trimmed hedges. Deputies jumped out, confusion written on their faces. They didn't expect to see a child trapped in rubble. They didn't expect to see an HOA president standing there proud of what she had done. The workers stepped back as the deputies shouted orders. Neighbors gathered tighter, recording every second, whispering, gasping. The father pulled his son out just as the roof gave way. The boy's face was red, streaked with tears, his little hands clinging to his dad's shirt. And still, Marcia stood there, unmoved, untouched, like she was above it all. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a shed. This was about power, her power, and how far she would go to prove she had it. I thought the deputies would calm things down, maybe fine the workers, maybe issue a warning. But what happened next? No one expected. Not me, not the neighbors, not even Marcia herself. And that's the part where I have to ask you, if you were standing there, watching a child pulled from rubble, and the HOA leaders smiling at the chaos, would you stay silent, or would you finally speak up? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you would face someone like her. After that day, people in the neighborhood started whispering more than ever. But the truth is, this story didn't begin with the shed collapsing. It began long before, with the way our HOA worked, and the way Marcia ruled it. Our neighborhood looked like something from a magazine cover, rows of identical houses, painted in soft pastels, perfect lawns, trimmed like green carpets, mailboxes lined up like soldiers, driveways washed clean, like nobody ever used them. It looked peaceful, but it wasn't. It was a place built on control, a place where image mattered more than people, and the HOA was the hand that kept the mask in place. Rules about grass length, rules about paint colors, rules about trash cans. When to put them out, how far from the curb they could sit, and if you forgot, even by an inch, a fine slipped into your mailbox like poison. The first time I got a letter, I laughed. It was about my front hedge. Apparently one branch was sticking out too far. Marcia's note said it was disturbing the symmetry of the street. Symmetry. As if one branch could destroy her kingdom. At first, I thought she was just annoying, but then I saw how she treated others. The single mom down the street, fined because her kids left a basketball hoop in the driveway. The elderly man on the corner, threatened with legal action because his mailbox leaned 1 inch too low. She didn't care if you were struggling. She didn't care if you cried to her. Every violation was fuel. Every violation was proof she was in charge. And the worst part, most people obeyed her, not because they respected her, but because they feared her. Fear was stronger than fairness here. One fine turned into two. Two fines turned into court threats. People would rather repaint their homes, mow their lawns twice a week, and bow their heads at meetings than stand up against her. It wasn't just rules. It was theater. Every HOA meeting was like a play, and she was the star. She sat at the head of the table, tapping her pen against the clipboard, her lipstick perfect, her hair like a helmet, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. If you spoke up, she silenced you. If you disagreed, she mocked you. If you tried to reason, she raised her voice until you fell quiet. And if anyone dared to challenge her power, she found their weakness: a late payment, a small crack in their driveway, a gar topdoaris. Den gnome too close to the sidewalk, she would circle it in red ink, send letters, pile on fines until you bent your knee. It was like living under a dictator, except her palace was a cul-de-sac. I know what you might be thinking. Why didn't we all rise up? Why didn't we vote her out? The truth is, most of us wanted to, but she played the system. She kept her friends on the board. She promised them favors. She forgave their violations. She made them feel untouchable. And so, every time someone ran against her, the votes mysteriously went her way. The HOA wasn't democracy here. It was a crown she wore with pride. And that's why the Wilsons never stood a chance. Their shed wasn't just a shed. It was a challenge, a bright-colored box in a sea of beige houses, a child's laughter echoing through a neighborhood of silence. To Marcia, that was rebellion, and rebellion had to be crushed. But here's the thing. The Wilsons weren't troublemakers. They were the kind of family everyone liked. They waved to neighbors, baked cookies at Christmas, helped shovel snow in winter. Their boy was quiet, polite, with a smile that could melt stone. And maybe that's why Marcia hated them more, because they were good, and good people made her power look ugly. I saw the way she watched them at HOA meetings. Every time their name came up, her lips curled into that smile without warmth. Every time they asked a question, she raised her eyebrows like they were fools. She was waiting for a chance. And when she saw the shed, she pounced. The official letter called it an unauthorized secondary structure, but we all knew what it was: a child's fort, paint peeling, toys inside, A little window with curtains his mom had sewn. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't hurting anyone. But Marcia saw it as the crack in her wall of order. If she let it stand, maybe others would start bending rules too. And that, she could never allow. So she made her move. She called the demolition company. She signed the order, and she planned the day like it was a party. She even dressed up, heels clicking against the pavement as she walked to watch it happen. The neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, whispering, filming with their phones. But nobody stopped her, because nobody dared. That's the world we lived in. A world where fear ruled over fairness, where a clipboard held more weight than compassion, where a child's laughter could be silenced by a signature. And looking back, maybe that's why the deputies came down so hard that day, because they didn't just see a shed collapse. They saw years of bullying collapse with it. They saw a president finally stepping too far over the line, and they knew it couldn't be ignored anymore. But here's what keeps me awake sometimes. If the boy hadn't been inside, if he had been out playing somewhere else, would Marcia have walked away clean again? Would we have all stayed quiet and let her keep her crown? What do you think? Do HOAs only fall when tragedy strikes? Or can neighbors take back their power before it's too late? Tell me in the comments, because maybe your answer is the one we all need to hear. The shed was small, but it stood like a giant in Marcia's mind. Every time she walked past it, her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed thin. It wasn't just wood and nails to her. It was defiance, and she hated defiance. I remember the first letter she sent to the Wilsons. It was long, printed on official HOA letterhead, filled with words like unauthorized and non-compliant. But at the bottom, she had scribbled her signature in red ink, like it was a personal warning, not just business. The Wilsons didn't fight back at first. They thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe if they explained, she would understand. They brought pictures of their son inside the shed, coloring books scattered on the floor, little toy cars lined up on a shelf. They said, "This is not a structure. This is our boy's playhouse." But Marcia wasn't moved. She tilted her head, smiled that tight smile, and said, "Rules are rules." The father clenched his fists. The mother pleaded. The boy hid behind her skirt, staring at Marcia like she was a monster in human form. And still, she didn't care. After that meeting, something in the neighborhood changed. You could feel it in the air, like a storm about to break. Neighbors whispered louder now. Some said Marcia was right, that rules kept property values safe. Others shook their heads, saying it was cruel, saying she had gone too far. But nobody wanted to say it out loud at the meetings, because when you spoke against her, she found ways to make you regret it. I saw it happen to my neighbor James. He complained once about fines for leaving his trash can out 10 minutes too long. A week later, he got 3 more fines. His grass was too tall, his shutters faded, his dog's leash too long. It was punishment, plain and simple, so he stopped speaking up, just like everyone else. But the Wilsons, they didn't stop. They sent letters. They went to board meetings. They even tried to gather her signatures to change the rule. Each time, Marcia crushed them with that same phrase. Rules are rules. The shed stayed, but so did the threats. First it was warnings, then it was fines, then it was letters from an attorney. Cold words typed on white paper, telling them the shed would come down whether they liked it or not. The boy didn't understand. To him, it wasn't about compliance or rules. It was about his little world, his safe place. He would sit in that shed with his flashlight at night, pretending it was a fort under siege. And in a way, it was. Only the enemy wasn't imaginary. It was standing right across the street in high heels, smiling like a queen. One evening, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The boy was in the yard, painting a sign with messy blue letters. It said, "My shed, my home." He hammered it into the ground right by the door. His father laughed, proud of him, but I could see Marcia watching from her window, her face hard as stone. The next morning, the Wilsons got another letter. This one was different. It wasn't just a fine, it was a demolition notice, signed by Marcia herself, sealed with HOA approval. The shed would be destroyed within days. That's when the conflict exploded. The Wilsons went door to door, asking neighbors to help. Some said yes quietly, others shut the door. too afraid to get involved. By the end of the week, a handful of us stood with them, but against Marcia's board. It felt like trying to stop a train with bare hands. At the next HOA meeting, the room was packed. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, whispering nervously. The Wilsons stood up, holding pictures of their son inside the shed. The father's voice shook with anger. This is not about rules. This is about a child. For the first time, the room clapped, but Marcia didn't flinch. She tapped her pen against the table and said calmly, "The shed comes down." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. It was the sound of fear, mixed with outrage, mixed with helplessness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the Wilsons' backyard. The boy sat inside the shed, a lantern glowing through the little window. He looked so small, yet so brave, like he knew a war was coming, and he wasn't leaving his fort. And then came the trucks, loud engines rumbling down the street one morning, heavy boots hitting the pavement. The Wilsons ran outside shouting. The boy was still in the shed, but the workers didn't care. They had papers in hand, signed and stamped. They were just following orders. The father screamed, the mother cried, and Marcia, she stood there watching, her sunglasses reflecting the chaos, her arms crossed like she was proud of the destruction she had caused. That was the moment everything snapped. The neighborhood, the Wilsons, even the deputies who arrived minutes later. Everyone realized this wasn't just a rule anymore. It was cruelty, and cruelty has a way of exposing the truth. But before I tell you what the deputies did, let me ask you something. If your child's happiness was being crushed by someone with nothing but a clipboard and fake authority, would you fight back, or would you let the rules win? Tell me in the comments, because maybe your answer is what the Wilsons should have done that day. The morning started quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet where the air feels heavy, where you know something is about to break. I was pouring coffee when I heard the engines. 2 trucks rumbled into the cul-de-sac, their tires grinding the pavement, their shadows stretching across the neat little lawns. Men in work boots climbed out, carrying hammers, crowbars, tool belts that clinked with every step. They didn't look around. They didn't smile. They just marched straight toward the Wilsons' backyard, like soldiers going to war. The Wilsons were already outside. The father's face was red with rage. The mother clutched her robe like armor. The boy stood by the shed door, eyes wide, holding his little sign that read, "My shed, my home." His voice cracked as he shouted, "This is mine." But the men didn't even look at him, and then she appeared. Marcia, high heels clicking, sunglasses flashing in the sunlight, clipboard in hand like a weapon. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look guilty. She looked satisfied, like this was the grand finale of her show. And the whole neighborhood were her audience. Neighbors peeked from their windows. Some stepped onto their lawns with phones raised, whispering to each other, recording every second. But nobody stepped forward. Fear had caged them too long. The first hammer swing cracked through the morning like thunder. Wood splintered. The shed shivered. The boy screamed. The mother lunged forward, only to be held back by one of the workers. Her cries pierced the air, raw and desperate. The father pushed against another man, shouting words that dissolved into rage. But the papers, those stupid papers, said Marcia was in the right. I froze on my porch, coffee spilling down my hand. My body wanted to run, to grab the boy. But my legs felt locked in cement. All I could do was watch. The shed shook again. Another hammer. Another board torn away. The boy was inside, crying now, pounding on the little window with his fists. The workers didn't care. Marcia didn't care. Her lips curled into that cold smile, the one that said, "I win." Neighbors gasped louder. Some shouted, but no one stopped the chaos. The sound of breaking wood mixed with the sound of a child's sobs. The smell of dust filled the air as the walls started to give way. Then, sirens, sharp, loud, screaming down the street. 2 patrol cars swerved into the cul-de-sac, red and blue lights painting the perfect houses in chaos. Deputies jumped out, their hands waving, their voices cutting through the noise. "Stop. Stop right now." The workers froze. For a moment, tools hanging in midair. The father broke free and yanked the shed door open. He pulled his son out, clutching him against his chest. The boy's face was streaked with tears and dust. his small body shaking like a leaf in the wind. The mother wrapped her arms around both of them, sobbing into her husband's shoulder, and still, Marcia stood there, unmoved, unbothered, like this was all beneath her. She tapped her pen against the clipboard, calm as ever, and said those same 3 words, "Rules are rules." The deputies turned toward her, confusion and anger in their eyes. They looked at the crying child, the broken shed, the terrified parents, and then back at her. One deputy asked, "Did you order this?" Marcia lifted her chin, adjusted her sunglasses, and said, "Yes." Her voice was steady, like she believed she was untouchable. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts, curses thrown into the air, phones zoomed closer, neighbors whispering, "Did you hear that?" She admitted it. The deputies glanced at each other. Something shifted in their faces. This wasn't just a neighborhood squabble anymore. This was something darker, something criminal. The workers slowly stepped back, their eyes darting between the deputies and Marcia. One of them muttered, "We were just following orders." But the damage was already done. The boy's sobs cut through the noise, sharp and painful, echoing against the neat little houses like a siren of truth. The deputies moved closer to Marcia. Her smile flickered for the first time. Not gone, not broken, but weaker. She still tried to stand tall, her heels planted firmly on the concrete, but I could see the sweat forming at her hairline for the first time. She wasn't in control. The father shouted, "She almost killed my son." The mother added, "She signed the papers. She forced this." Neighbors nodded, voices rising, anger spilling like fire. The cul-de-sac was no longer silent. It was alive with fury. The deputies raised their hands to calm the crowd, but the truth was already out. The queen of the HOA, the woman who led with fines and threats, was suddenly the one under judgment. I will never forget her face in that moment, the shift from pride to panic, the way her lips pressed tight, the way her sunglasses couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. For years, she had hidden behind rules and bylaws, but now she was exposed, and justice was standing right in front of her. With a badge and handcuffs, the boy clung tighter to his father's shirt, his small body trembling. The neighbors whispered, "She's finished." But none of us knew then just how far the deputies would go. None of us knew that this wasn't just going to be about a shed anymore. This was about power, corruption, and a child who became the spark for justice. And that's where I'll leave you for now, because I need to ask you something. If you were standing there, watching deputies confront the HOA leader who almost destroyed a family's peace, would you cheer for her downfall, or would you secretly fear what happens when the queen finally loses her crown? The air was thick, heavy with dust and anger. The shed lay broken, scattered across the grass like bones. The boy's cries had quieted. Now just soft sobs pressed into his father's shoulder, but the sound that stayed was the deputy's voice. "Did you order this?" Marcia's answer came sharp and cold. "Yes." For a moment, the world froze. The neighbors stopped whispering, the workers shifted on their feet, even the siren seemed to fall silent, because she had said it, out loud. Without hesitation, I felt my chest tighten. It was like watching a snake bite its own tail. For years, she had hidden behind rules, behind papers and bylaws, but in her pride, in her hunger to show power, she had admitted the truth. She was the one who caused this. The deputy took a step closer, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed. "You understand? A child was inside. You understand this could have killed him." Marcia tilted her head, her lips curved into that smile, the one that never reached her eyes. She said, "The parents should have removed him. This is their fault, not mine." Gasps spread through the crowd. The mother clutched her son tighter. The father's face turned red with fury. He shouted, "You signed the order. You sent those men here. My boy could have died because of you." The deputy raised a hand to calm him, but I could see his own patience snapping. He turned back to Marcia. "You put this order through. You didn't verify safety, and you didn't stop it when you saw a child inside." Marcia straightened her back, like a soldier refusing to bend. "Rules are rules," she said again. Her voice was steady, but I could see a tremor in her hands now. She clutched that clipboard tighter, as if it could shield her from justice. One of the neighbors yelled, "She's dangerous!" Another shouted, "Arrest her!" The crowd was no longer quiet, no longer afraid. It was like a dam had broken, years of fear spilled into rage. People outed fines she had given them, stories of how she humiliated them at meetings, tales of how she threatened court for the smallest things. It wasn't just about the shed anymore. It was about all of us. The deputies looked around, the voices rising higher, phones pointed at Marcia from every angle. Every second was being recorded, every word was being captured. She couldn't hide anymore. The second deputy whispered something to his partner. Then they stepped closer to her. For the first time, Marcia's smile flickered, her sunglasses slipped lower on her nose, and in her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. "Ma'am," the deputy said firmly, "I need you to hand over that clipboard." Marcia laughed, but it was thin, hollow. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I'm the HOA president. I have authority here." The deputy shook his head. "Not anymore. Right now, you are under investigation for child endangerment." The crowd erupted again. Cheers, claps, gasps. The father shouted, "Finally!" The mother cried harder. But this time with relief, Marcia's hand shook as she clutched her clipboard tighter. She looked around, searching for allies, but none of her board members spoke. They stood at the edge of the crowd, silent, their eyes avoiding hers. Even her closest supporters had abandoned her. For years they had feared her, but now, they feared being tied to her downfall more. The deputy repeated his order, "Give me the clipboard." Slowly, stiffly, Marcia handed it over. Her nails dug into the paper as if it were her crown, and in that moment, I swear she looked smaller, not in size, but in spirit, the queen of the cul-de-sac, stripped of her power. The deputy flipped through the papers. The signatures were clear. The order was undeniable. Her name written in red ink at the bottom. There was no escape. The deputy looked up. "Ma'am, you're coming with us." Gasps again, louder than before. The neighbor surged forward, some shouting with joy, others just stunned. The boy peeked out from his father's shoulder, his eyes wide as he watched the woman who had tried to destroy his safe place being taken away. Marcia tried one last time. "You don't understand. I was protecting the neighborhood. I was keeping order." But her voice cracked on the word order. And for the first time, she sounded human. Not powerful, not untouchable, just desperate. The deputies moved in. One read her rights. The other held her by the arm. Her heels clicked against the pavement. But this time it wasn't power. It was defeat. The crowd followed. Phones recording. Whispers buzzing like bees. "She's done. She's finished. She deserves it." And as I stood there watching, I felt something strange. Relief, but also sadness. Not for her, but for all of us. Because it took a child's pain, it took near tragedy, to break her hold. We had been silent for too long, and silence had given her power. Now that power was gone, but at what cost? The boy's shed lay in ruins, his safe place destroyed, his laughter stolen for a moment he would never forget. The parents clutched him tight, but their eyes carried scars too, scars of being helpless against someone who wore authority like armor. The deputies led Marcia to the patrol car, her sunglasses gone now, her eyes bare. She looked out at us, and for the first time, she seemed small, not a queen, not a leader, just a woman who had gone too far. They placed her in the back seat. The door slammed shut, and the sound echoed like justice finally landing in suburbia. But as the car drove away, I couldn't stop thinking, if the boy hadn't been inside, if the shed had been empty, would she have walked away again? Would we still be living under her rules, afraid of letters and fines? What do you think? Do people like Marcia only fall when tragedy forces our hand? Or can a community rise before the breaking point comes? Tell me in the comments, because Matre, I be your story, is the warning someone else needs to hear. The sound of the patrol car door slamming still echoed in my ears. It was a sound none of us ever thought we'd hear. The sound of the HOA president being taken away. Not as a leader, but as a suspect. The cul-de-sac stood frozen for a moment. Neighbors clutched their phones, whispering. The Wilson boy sat in his father's arms, his small chest rising and falling as he tried to catch his breath. His mother stroked his hair, whispering soft words only he could hear, but the look in her eyes was something I'll never forget. It was the look of a mother who had almost lost everything, and the look of a woman who wanted justice. The deputies didn't leave right away. They stayed, taking statements, writing reports. One walked the perimeter of the shed's remains, snapping photos of the splintered wood. Another recorded the bruises on the boy's arms where he had been pulled through the wreckage, and through it all. Marcia sat in the back seat of the patrol car, her head held high at first, but as the minutes passed, her shoulders sagged. I watched from my porch. For years I had seen her strut across these streets like she owned them. Now she was caged behind glass, and for the first time, I realized something. Without her power, without her board, without her clipboard, she wasn't much at all. Just another neighbor, another human, and a broken one at that. The deputies finally closed their notebooks. They stepped toward the patrol car, and one of them pulled the door open. "Marcia Taylor," he said firmly, "you are being charged with child endangerment and reckless conduct." The crowd gasped. The words hung in the air like lightning. Charged. Not warned, not fined. Charged. Her face drained of color. She shook her head, stammering, "This is wrong. I was following bylaws. I was protecting the neighborhood." But the deputy didn't flinch. "Your bylaws don't override state law, and they don't excuse putting a child in danger." Her mouth opened and closed, like she was trying to swallow the truth. The sound of the patrol car door slamming still echoed in my ears. It was a sound none of us ever thought we'd hear. The sound of the HOA president being taken away, not as a leader, but as a suspect. The cul-de-sac stood frozen for a moment. Neighbors clutched their phones, whispering. The Wilson boy sat in his father's arms, his small chest rising and falling as he tried to catch his breath. His mother stroked his hair, whispering soft words only he could hear, but the look in her eyes was something I'll never forget. It was the look of a mother who had almost lost everything, and the look of a woman who wanted justice. The deputies didn't leave right away. They stayed, taking statements, writing reports. One walked the perimeter of the shed's remains, snapping photos of the splintered wood. Another recorded the bruises on the boy's arms where he had been pulled through the wreckage, and through it all. Marcia sat in the back seat of the patrol car, her head held high at first, but as the minutes passed, her shoulders sagged. I watched from my porch. For years I had seen her strut across these streets like she owned them. Now she was caged behind glass, and for the first time, I realized something. Without her power, without her board, without her clipboard, she wasn't much at all. Just another neighbor, another human, and a broken one at that. The deputies finally closed their notebooks. They stepped toward the patrol car, and one of them pulled the door open. "Marcia Taylor," he said firmly, "you are being charged with child endangerment and reckless conduct." The crowd gasped. The words hung in the air like lightning. Charged. Not warned, not fined. Charged. Her face drained of color. She shook her head, stammering, "This is wrong. I was following bylaws. I was protecting the neighborhood." But the deputy didn't flinch. "Your bylaws don't override state law, and they don't excuse putting a child in danger." Her mouth opened and closed, like she was trying to swallow the truth. For years, she had used that excuse. Rules are rules. But now the rules weren't hers anymore. Now the rules belonged to the law. The second deputy stepped forward with handcuffs. The sound of metal clicking was sharp, final. The neighbors leaned closer, phones recording, whispers growing louder. "Is this really happening?" someone muttered. "It's about time," another said. "She finally got what she deserved," whispered an elderly man with tears in his eyes. I felt something stir inside me, a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that she could no longer hide behind her crown. Sadness that it had taken this much, a child's tears, a family's pain, to bring her down. The deputies guided her out of the car. Her heels wobbled on the pavement, her hands cuffed behind her back, her sunglasses gone now, her eyes bare, and in them I saw anger, fear, and something else too, a glimmer of shame. The father stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He just held his son close and said, "Look at him. This is what you did." The boy peeked out from his father's chest, his eyes red and swollen. Marcia looked at him for only a second, and then she looked away. The deputies led her past the crowd. The neighbors didn't move aside quickly. They made her walk slowly. Through whispers, through judgment, through the people she had ruled over for years, and every step stripped away another piece of her power. When they placed her back in the car, silence fell. Not because people were afraid anymore, but because everyone was realizing the same thing. The queen was gone, the throne was empty, and our neighborhood would never be the same. The patrol car pulled away, its lights flashing red and blue against the pastel houses. We watched until it disappeared around the corner, and only then did the crowd finally exhale. Some cheered, some hugged, some just stood still, processing what they had seen. It wasn't just the fall of one woman, it was the fall of an entire system of fear. But as the relief washed over us, I saw something else. The Wilson boys' shed, or what was left of it, wood scattered across the yard, paint chipped and broken, a child's dream reduced to rubble. The boy tugged at his father's sleeve. He whispered something, too quiet for us to hear, but the father's face crumpled, and he pulled his son closer. That's when I realized, even though Marcia was gone, the damage she caused remained. The family would rebuild. Maybe not the shed, but something else. A new safe place, a new memory. But the scar would always be there, a scar of power abused, of rules twisted into weapons. And maybe that's what made the deputies' decision so powerful. They weren't just arresting a woman. They were arresting a symbol of what happens when authority forgets humanity. As the crowd slowly dispersed, I stood frozen. Neighbors walked back to their homes. Phones buzzed as videos uploaded, as messages spread. By nightfall, the whole town would know. And by tomorrow, maybe the whole state. The Wilsons lingered in their yard, the father kneeling by the rubble, the mother holding their son in her arms, the boy's little sign, "My shed, my home," still stuck in the grass, the letters messy but brave. I stared at it. And it felt like a warning, not just to Marcia, but to all of us, because rules without compassion are nothing but cages, and cages always break. The next morning, I saw something that stayed with me. The Wilson boy was back outside. This time not crying. He was gathering the broken wood with his small hands, stacking it in a pile, piece by piece, like he was already rebuilding, like he refused to let her win. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just the climax of one story. This was the start of another, the end of her reign, but the beginning of something new. But I need to ask you this. If you were that boy, if your safe place was destroyed by someone drunk on power, would you rebuild, or would you let the rubble remind you of what was lost? That night, the cul-de-sac was quiet again. The flashing lights were gone. The trucks had left. The crowd had scattered. But the silence wasn't the same. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence after a storm. I sat on my porch long after everyone went inside. The air smelled of sawdust and gasoline. The Wilsons' yard was still a mess. Broken boards scattered across the grass. Their boy had finally fallen asleep in his mother's arms. Exhausted from tears, the father sat in the dark, staring at the ruins of the shed like it was a battlefield. I wanted to go inside, but I couldn't. Something about the night felt heavy, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. For years we had lived under her shadow, and in one single day, it was gone. The news spread faster than wildfire. By morning, everyone in town knew what had happened. Videos flooded social media, clips of Marcia saying, "Rules are rules," clips of the boy crying inside the shed, clips of the deputies reading her charges. It was everywhere. The queen of the HOA had become a villain online. People who never cared about our neighborhood before suddenly had opinions. Some laughed at her downfall. Some raged at the cruelty of the HOA system. Some said it was about time someone in power got what they deserved. It was strange, seeing our quiet little street turned into a headline, but that's what happens when power eats itself. The world loves to watch the crown fall. The next HOA meeting never happened. The board canceled it. No one dared to take her seat at the head of the table. No one dared to call themselves in charge. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt leaderless, and honestly, it felt better that way. Neighbors started talking to each other again, not in whispers, but in real conversations. People who never spoke at meetings stood in the street sharing stories of fines they had paid, letters they had received, threats they had endured. We laughed at the absurdity, we cried at the cruelty, and slowly, we realized something. The HOA had never been about protecting us, it had been about protecting her, without Marcia. The rules suddenly looked ridiculous. The mailbox height, the trash can placement, the lawn color restrictions. All the little things we used to lose sleep over. Now they seemed like jokes. The Wilsons became something more than just neighbors. They became symbols. Their boy, the kid who loved his shed, became the child who stood up to the queen. People brought them food, offered to help clean their yard. Even the ones who had stayed silent before came with apologies and sympathy. It didn't fix the pain, but it showed something, that maybe we weren't as broken as we thought. I visited them a few days later. The boy was outside again. He was sitting in the grass with a hammer too big for his hands. He was tapping nails into a board, clumsy but determined. His father watched with a tired smile. They weren't rebuilding the shed yet, but they were starting something, a birdhouse, a small one, painted bright blue. The boy grinned at me and said, "This one's just for the birds." I smiled back, but inside, I felt the weight of what he had lost, and the strength of what he had gained. As for Marcia, she didn't come back. She was charged, released on bail, and disappeared from the cul-de-sac. Some said she moved to stay with relatives. Others said she was hiding from the cameras. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was the silence she left behind, the silence of a throne no one wanted anymore. Weeks passed. The grass grew taller in some yards. No fines came. Mailboxes leaned a little crow. Okay. No letters arrived. Kids played basketball in driveways without fear of punishment. It was messy, imperfect, but it was real. And in that mess, we finally felt free. I walked the street one evening. Just as the sun set, the houses glowed golden in the light. Laughter carried from one yard to another. The Wilson boy ran past me chasing a ball. His mother called after him, her voice full of life again. The world hadn't ended without Marcia. It had only just begun. But here's the irony that keeps me up at night. For years, we let her rule us because we were afraid. Afraid of fines, afraid of letters, afraid of losing what we thought was order. And in the end, it wasn't courage that broke her. It was tragedy. It was a child trapped in rubble that forced us to wake up. And I wonder, if that boy hadn't been inside, if the shed had fallen empty, would we have let her keep her crown? Would we still be living under her shadow, telling ourselves rules are rules, while our lives rotted under control? I don't know the answer, but I know this: the sound of those handcuffs clicking shut, the sound of her being led away. It was the sound of freedom returning to our street, and maybe, just maybe, the sound of a lesson for all of us, because power without compassion is poison, and if we don't stop it, it grows, until one day, it destroys more than sheds. It destroys trust. It destroys communities. It destroys lives. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the Wilson boy hammer his birdhouse, I thought about something simple. It doesn't take a queen to run a neighborhood. It doesn't take fear to keep order. It just takes people, caring about people. And maybe that's the real secret. Not HOA bylaws, not fines, not rules, just kindness. Simple, messy, human kindness. But let me leave you with this. If your community was ruled by someone like Marcia, someone drunk on power, would you wait for tragedy to stop them? Or would you rise before it was too late?